Penelope Foster's gaze swept across the barren land stretching before her as the stagecoach rattled to a halt in the dusty town of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. 1878. The journey west had emptied her pockets and hollowed her spirit, but she had nowhere else to go after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts and broken promises. "Last stop, miss," the driver called, his voice rough from trail dust. "Silver Creek." Penelope gathered her single carpet bag containing the meager remnants of her former life. At 22, she had already weathered more heartache than most faced in a lifetime. First her mother's death when she was 12, then years of her father's gambling and drinking, followed by his sudden passing 3 months ago. The creditors had taken everything else. "Need help down?" the driver asked, extending a weathered hand. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping carefully onto the hard-packed dirt of the main street. The late afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and Penelope squinted against its harsh glare. Silver Creek was smaller than she'd imagined, a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, most bearing signs of age and neglect. Clutching the letter that had brought her here, Penelope made her way toward the establishment at the far end of the street. Mrs. Adeline Jenkins, a distant acquaintance of her mother's, had responded to her desperate plea with an offer of employment at her boarding house. It wasn't much, but it was all Penelope had. The Silver Creek boarding house stood 3 stories tall, its white paint peeling under the merciless sun. Penelope paused at the front steps, gathering her courage before climbing to the covered porch. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a stout woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "You must be the Foster girl," the woman said, her sharp eyes taking in Penelope's travel-worn appearance. "Thought you'd arrive tomorrow." "The stagecoach made better time than expected, Mrs. Jenkins," Penelope replied, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "I'm grateful for the opportunity. Save your gratitude until you see what you're in for," Mrs. Jenkins interrupted, ushering her inside. "Room and board in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping with the guests. Days start at dawn and end when the work is done. Sundays you'll have the afternoon to yourself after church." The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but Penelope could see the worn furniture and faded wallpaper of the front sitting room. A narrow staircase led to the upper floors, and from somewhere in the back came the clatter of dishes. "Your room's in the attic," Mrs. Jenkins continued, already moving toward the stairs. "It's small, but it's private. Most girls in your situation would be grateful for that much." Penelope bit back a response. Girls in her situation? The words stung, but they weren't untrue. Destitute. Alone. Desperate? "I'll show you your duties in the morning," Mrs. Jenkins said as they reached the top floor. She pushed open a narrow door, revealing a steep set of stairs. "Get settled and come down for supper at 6. Kitchen's through the back of the dining room." Left alone, Penelope climbed to her new quarters. The attic room was indeed small, with sloped ceilings and a single window that overlooked the back of the property. A narrow bed, a plain washstand, and a small trunk were the only furnishings. But it was clean, and it was hers for now at least. Setting her bag on the bed, Penelope moved to the window. Beyond the boarding house stretched empty land leading to distant mountains. Silver Creek wasn't much, but perhaps here she could start anew, away from the whispers and pitying glances that had followed her in Boston after her father's disgrace. "It's only temporary," she whispered to herself, the mantra that had carried her through these past difficult months. Though as she surveyed the dusty town below, she wondered if anything in life was ever truly permanent. Morning came with the first hint of dawn and the insistent clanging of a bell. Penelope jolted awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The previous day's journey came rushing back as she hurried to dress in one of her 3 serviceable dresses. This one, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite fashionable but now showed wear at the cuffs and collar. Mrs. Jenkins was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed over her ample bosom. "You'll need to be quicker than that if you want to keep your position," she said by way of greeting. "I apologize," Penelope replied, tying an apron around her waist. "It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. Now, first task is breakfast for the boarders. We've got 5 permanent residents and 2 traveling salesmen staying currently. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee should be ready by 7 sharp." Penelope nodded, surveying the kitchen. Though not formally trained as a cook, she had managed their household after her mother died, learning through necessity rather than choice. The wood stove was already lit, its warmth filling the kitchen. "I'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt, Mrs. Jenkins raised an eyebrow but said nothing more before leaving Penelope to her task. The morning passed in a blur of cooking, serving, and cleaning. The boarders barely acknowledged her presence beyond grunting their thanks or requesting more coffee. By mid-morning, Penelope's feet ached and her hands were red from hot water and harsh soap. But she pressed on, determined not to give Mrs. Jenkins reason to regret her charity. As she was hanging laundry in the backyard during a brief lull in her duties, the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A man on horseback approached the boarding house from the direction of the open country. Even from a distance, Penelope could tell he sat his mount with the easy confidence of someone who spent most of his life in the saddle. The rider dismounted at the hitching post, giving Penelope a better view. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical attire of a working cowboy denim pants, a simple shirt, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. When he removed the hat to wipe his brow, Penelope caught a glimpse of sun-bronzed features and hair the color of wheat. Something about his unhurried movements and the way he spoke softly to his horse as he secured the reins made Penelope pause in her work. He seemed different from the hard-eyed men who frequented the saloon across the street or the businessmen who passed through town without truly seeing it. "Miss, you the new help at Jenkins' place?" Penelope started, realizing the man had noticed her watching. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, sir, just arrived yesterday." He approached the fence separating the boarding house yard from the alley. "Name's Ethan Caldwell. I work at the Diamond K Ranch outside town." His voice carried the slight drawl she was beginning to associate with the territory. "Mrs. Jenkins mentioned she'd hired someone new." "Penelope Foster," she replied, lowering the sheet she'd been about to hang. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Caldwell." A smile crossed his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to striking. "Most folks just call me Ethan." He tilted his head slightly. "You're a long way from home, judging by your accent." "Boston," she confirmed, "though I don't consider it home anymore." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended because his expression softened. "Silver Creek's not much, but it grows on you, given time." "Penelope," Mrs. Jenkins' sharp call cut through the air, "those sheets won't hang themselves." "I should return to my duties," Penelope said, embarrassed at being caught in conversation when she should be working. Ethan replaced his hat with a nod. "Don't let me keep you. Just wanted to introduce myself since I drop by once a week to deliver fresh milk and eggs from the ranch." As he turned to leave, Penelope found herself watching his retreating form, wondering about the man who had taken the time to greet a new face in town when others had barely spared her a glance. "Girls got no business making eyes at Ethan Caldwell," Mrs. Jenkins said from directly behind her, making Penelope jump. "I wasn't," Penelope began, but Mrs. Jenkins waved away her protest. "Handsome men like that are nothing but trouble for girls in your position," the older woman continued. "Best remember why you're here and keep to your duties." "Yes, madam," Penelope replied automatically, returning to the laundry with renewed focus. But even as she worked, she couldn't help wondering why Mrs. Jenkins seemed so concerned about a simple introduction. The days fell into a predictable pattern. Penelope rose before dawn, prepared breakfast for the boarders, cleaned rooms, did laundry, prepared lunch and dinner, and fell into bed each night exhausted but oddly satisfied with the honest work. If her life lacked excitement or comfort, at least it had purpose, and no one in Silver Creek knew of her family's disgrace. True to his word, Ethan Caldwell appeared every Wednesday morning with fresh supplies from the Diamond K Ranch. Despite Mrs. Jenkins' disapproving glances, he always had a friendly word for Penelope and sometimes lingered to share news of the town or tales of ranch life. "The foreman's got us breaking new horses this week," he told her one morning as she helped unload milk cans from his wagon. "Got a beautiful bay mare that nearly bucked me into next week yesterday." "Sounds dangerous," Penelope remarked, trying to imagine the gentle-spoken man before her engaged in such wild work. Ethan laughed, the sound warming something inside her that had been cold for too long. "It can be. But there's nothing like the feeling when you and the horse finally come to an understanding. It's not about breaking their spirit, it's about earning their trust." His words stayed with Penelope long after he'd ridden away. Trust was something she'd learned to withhold, especially after watching her father squander not only their money but also their good name and her future prospects. One evening in late October, nearly 2 months after her arrival, Mrs. Jenkins approached Penelope as she finished washing the dinner dishes. "Silver Creek's having its harvest dance Saturday next," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "The whole town turns out. You should go, might do you good to socialize a bit." Penelope looked up in surprise. It was the closest thing to kindness the older woman had shown since her arrival. "I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Jenkins interrupted. "You've worked hard with nary a complaint. You've earned a night off. Besides," she added with a rare smile, "you're young. Shouldn't spend all your time working and no time living." "Thank you," Penelope said, genuinely touched, "but I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an occasion." Mrs. Jenkins studied her for a moment. "Come with me," she said finally, leading the way upstairs to her private quarters. From a cedar chest at the foot of her bed, she withdrew a dress of deep burgundy wool, simple but elegant with its fitted bodice and gracefully flowing skirt. "My daughter's," she explained, a hint of sadness crossing her features. "She's been gone these 5 years now, married a railroad man and moved to California. Left most of her things behind, said the fashions would be different out west anyway." She held the dress against Penelope. "Might need taking in a bit, but the color would suit you." Penelope touched the soft fabric reverently. "I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Mrs. Jenkins said firmly. "No sense it sitting in a chest gathering dust when it could be put to good use. Consider it a loan." That night, as Penelope made the necessary alterations to the dress by lamplight, her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan Caldwell. Would he attend the dance? The possibility sent an unexpected thrill through her, followed immediately by self-reproach. Mrs. Jenkins was right, men like Ethan weren't for girls like her. She had nothing to offer except a tarnished family name and a future of hard work. Still, as she stitched the fine wool, Penelope allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to dance under the stars with someone who looked at her the way Ethan sometimes did, as if she were worth seeing. The town hall was transformed for the harvest dance, its usually austere interior festooned with autumn leaves, dried corn husks, and paper lanterns that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes in one corner while townspeople of all ages filled the space with laughter and conversation. Penelope stood near the entrance, suddenly uncertain. She'd spent so much time working that she knew almost no one beyond the borders and a few shopkeepers. The borrowed dress fit perfectly after her alterations, and she'd arranged her dark hair in a simple but elegant style, but she still felt like an outsider looking in. "Miss Foster, that you under all that finery?" She turned to find Ethan Caldwell regarding her with an appreciative smile. He looked different too, having traded his work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. His wheat gold hair was neatly combed, though a few strands rebelliously curled near his temple. "Mr. Caldwell," she acknowledged, hoping the dim light concealed her blush. "Yes, Mrs. Jenkins was kind enough to lend me a dress for the occasion." "Well, it suits you," he said with a sincerity that made her heart flutter. "And I thought I told you to call me Ethan." "Ethan," she amended, finding the name easier to say than she expected. I didn't know if you'd be here tonight. Wouldn't miss it, he replied, his blue eyes never leaving her face. The ranch hands look forward to these dances for months, chance to remember we're more than just cowboys. He extended his hand. Would you honor me with a dance, Penelope? The sound of her name on his lips sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the crowded room. I should warn you, it's been some time since I've danced. His smile widened. Then we'll go slow. Ethan led her onto the floor just as the band struck up a waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, guiding her with the same confidence he showed on horseback. Despite her concerns, Penelope found herself following his lead effortlessly, as if they'd danced together 100 times before. You're a natural, he said as they moved among the other couples. Hard to believe you've been out of practice. Perhaps it's the partner, she replied before she could think better of it, his eyes crinkled at the corners. Now you're just being kind. As the evening progressed, Penelope danced not only with Ethan but with several other men from town, including the young bank clerk and the blacksmith's son. Yet her eyes kept finding Ethan across the room, and more often than not, she discovered him watching her as well. During a break in the music, he brought her a cup of punch and led her to a quieter corner. You're the talk of the dance, he said, leaning against a support beam. The mysterious Eastern lady who's won every heart in Silver Creek. Penelope laughed, the sound surprising even herself. When had she last truly laughed? Hardly mysterious, and certainly not a lady, at least not anymore. What do you mean by that? Ethan asked, his expression growing more serious. Penelope immediately regretted her words. The pleasant evening had lowered her guard, but Silver Creek was still a small town where reputations mattered. Nothing of importance, she said quickly. Just that working as a domestic doesn't exactly qualify one for high society. Ethan studied her for a moment, and Penelope had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she intended to reveal. There's no shame in honest work, he said finally. And a true lady is made by her character, not her occupation. Before Penelope could respond, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at her elbow. Getting late, she said, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. We should head back before it gets too dark. Of course, Penelope agreed, recognizing the propriety of the suggestion. She turned to Ethan. Thank you for the dance and the conversation. The pleasure was mine, he replied, the sincerity in his voice undeniable. Perhaps I might call on you sometime. Properly, I mean, not just to deliver eggs. Penelope felt Mrs. Jenkins stiffen beside her, but the older woman remained silent, waiting for her response. I would like that, Penelope said softly. As they walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Penelope couldn't stop the small smile that curved her lips. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, perhaps for the first time in years, she felt something like hope stirring within her. He's a good man, Ethan Caldwell, Mrs. Jenkins said unexpectedly as they reached the front porch. Better than most in these parts. He seems to be, Penelope agreed carefully. Mrs. Jenkins sighed, suddenly looking every one of her years. Just be careful, girl. Men like that decent, handsome, hardworking, they can have their pick of women. Don't go pinning your hopes on something that might not come to pass. The warning stung, but Penelope recognized it as well-intentioned. I assure you, I have no illusions about my position or prospects. That's what worries me, Mrs. Jenkins muttered as she unlocked the door. Sometimes I think you've convinced yourself you don't deserve anything good at all. True to his word, Ethan called on Penelope the following Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Jenkins' only comment was a reminder that they should remain in the front parlor with the door open, as is proper. The tacit approval surprised Penelope almost as much as Ethan's invitation had. He arrived promptly at 2, dressed in clean but simple clothes, his hat in his hands. These are for you, he said, presenting a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Not much compared to what you probably had back east, but they made me think of you. They're lovely, Penelope said, genuinely touched by the gesture. No one has given me flowers in a very long time." They sat in the parlor, initially making somewhat stilted conversation about the dance and the unseasonably warm weather. Gradually, however, the awkwardness faded as Ethan began sharing stories of his life on the Diamond K. "I've been there since I was 16, he explained. "Started as a stable boy, worked my way up to full cowhand by 18. The owner, Mr. Kincaid, he's a fair man, treats his workers well." "And your family?" Penelope asked, then immediately regretted the question when a shadow crossed his face. "Lost my pa in 65, he fought for the Union. Ma tried to keep the farm going after, but it was too much. She passed when I was 15. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Penelope could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "My mother died when I was 12. It changes things." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Makes you grow up faster than you should." He studied her for a moment. "What brought you all the way out here, if you don't mind my asking? Silver Creek's not exactly a destination for Eastern ladies." Penelope hesitated, knowing the question would come eventually but still unprepared to reveal the full truth. "My father died earlier this year," she began carefully. "There were financial difficulties. I had no siblings, no close relatives willing to take me in. Mrs. Jenkins was an acquaintance of my mother's who responded to my letter seeking employment. It wasn't a lie, but it omitted her father's gambling debts, the whispers of fraud that followed his death, and the cold shoulders of former friends who feared association with the Foster name might taint their own reputations." "Must have taken courage," Ethan said, "leaving everything you knew to come to a place like this." Penelope shook her head. "Not courage, necessity. Sometimes they are the same thing." Their conversation continued, moving to lighter topics: books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see someday. Penelope found herself laughing at Ethan's dry humor and astute observations about the townspeople. "Sheriff Thompson acts tough as nails, but I once saw him rescue a kitten from a tree and keep it hidden in his office for 3 days until he found it a home," Ethan confided, his eyes twinkling. "Said a lawman couldn't be seen getting soft over a cat, but he fed it cream from his own coffee every morning." When Mrs. Jenkins discreetly cleared her throat from the doorway, Penelope was startled to realize 2 hours had passed. Ethan stood immediately, understanding the signal. "Thank you for your time, Miss Foster," he said formally for Mrs. Jenkins' benefit. Then more quietly, "I'd like to call on you again next Sunday if you're willing." "I'd like that very much," Penelope replied, surprised by how much she meant it. After he left, Mrs. Jenkins regarded Penelope with an unreadable expression. "That boy's sweet on you," she said finally. "Has been since the first day you arrived, I suspect." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure you're mistaken. He's simply being kind to a newcomer." Mrs. Jenkins snorted. "I've known Ethan Caldwell for 5 years. Never once seen him bring flowers to any girl in town, and there've been plenty who would have welcomed them." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Just be careful with his heart, girl, and your own." As autumn deepened into winter, Ethan's Sunday visits became the highlight of Penelope's week. Sometimes they walked through town when the weather permitted, Ethan pointing out places of interest and introducing her to people he knew. Other times they sat in the boarding house parlor, sharing stories and slowly learning each other's histories, though Penelope still carefully avoided the full truth of her father's disgrace. One crisp December afternoon, Ethan arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The Diamond K is hosting a Christmas celebration next weekend," he explained as they sat before the parlor fire. "Nothing fancy, just good food, some music, maybe a bit of dancing. Mr. Kincaid invites the Hands and their families every year." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like you to come as my guest." Penelope blinked in surprise. "Me, but I'm not family." "No," he agreed, a hint of color rising to his tanned face. "But you're important to me, Penelope." The simple words sent her heart racing. Over the weeks of their acquaintance, Penelope had tried to guard against developing deeper feelings for Ethan. Men like him, honest, kind, respected, didn't end up with women whose families were disgraced, whose only prospects were a life of service. Yet here he was, looking at her with those earnest blue eyes, waiting for an answer she wasn't sure she should give. "I'd have to ask Mrs. Jenkins," she said finally. "I'm not sure she can spare me." "Already did," Ethan replied with a small smile. "She said you're due a day off and she can manage Christmas dinner for the boarders herself." "You thought of everything," Penelope said, both touched and unsettled by his consideration. "Not everything," he admitted. "Still need to know if you want to come." The sensible answer would be no. The more time she spent with Ethan, the harder it would be when he inevitably discovered the truth about her past and withdrew his attention. Better to end things now, before her heart was truly engaged. But looking at him, this man who treated her with respect and kindness when she'd grown accustomed to neither, Penelope couldn't bring herself to refuse. "Yes," she said softly, "I'd like that very much." The Diamond K Ranch stood in a sheltered valley about 5 miles outside Silver Creek. Ethan arrived at the boarding house early on Christmas Eve morning with a sturdy wagon and team, ready to transport Penelope for her first excursion beyond the town limits since her arrival. "It's not much to look at this time of year," he apologized as they traveled through the winter-brown landscape. "But come spring, this whole valley turns green. Wildflowers everywhere you look." "I think it's beautiful now," Penelope said honestly, admiring the stark lines of distant mountains and the way the low winter sun gilded the dormant grass. As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn where smoke rose from the chimney. "The celebration's in the barn," Ethan explained as they approached. "More room for everyone, and the animals help keep it warm." True to his word, the interior of the barn had been transformed. Clean straw covered the floor, while evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorned the walls. Tables laden with food lined one side, and a small group of musicians was setting up in a corner. Lanterns hung from the rafters, ready to provide light when evening fell. "Ethan, about time you showed up." A burly man with a salt and pepper beard strode toward them, his face creased in a welcoming smile. "And you must be Miss Foster. Heard a lot about you from this one." He jerked a thumb toward Ethan, whose ears reddened noticeably. "Mr. Kincaid," Ethan said by way of introduction. "The owner of the Diamond K. Pleased to meet you, sir," Penelope said, extending her hand. "Thank you for including me in your celebration." "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here," Kincaid replied, his shrewd eyes taking her measure. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because his smile widened. "Now come on in properly and meet everyone. We're like family here at the Diamond K, and family doesn't stand on ceremony." The day passed in a blur of introductions, hearty food, and genuine laughter. Penelope met the ranch hands and their families, all of whom welcomed her without reservation upon seeing she was with Ethan. Children ran between the adults, excited about the small gifts that would be distributed after dinner. "You look happy," Ethan observed as they stood to one side watching the festivities. "It suits you." Penelope realized with a start that he was right. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly content. "It's a wonderful celebration," she said. "Thank you for bringing me." "There's something else I wanted to show you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "If you can bundle up for a short ride." Curious, Penelope agreed, and soon they were in the wagon again, traveling a short distance from the main ranch buildings. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the winter landscape. "Where are we going?" she asked as Ethan guided the team up a gentle slope. "You'll see," was all he would say. At the top of the rise stood a small cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. It was simple but well-maintained, with a covered porch and windows that glowed with warm light. "My place," Ethan explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "Been building it for the past 3 years, whenever I had time off from ranch duties." "It's not much, but it's wonderful," Penelope interrupted, genuinely impressed. "You built this yourself, most of it, had help with the roof and chimney." He led her up the steps, hesitating at the door. "I wanted you to see it to see what I've been working toward all these years." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while simple but well-crafted furniture filled the main room. A curtain separated what Penelope assumed was the sleeping area, and shelves held books and a few personal items. "It's lovely," she said, warming her hands by the fire he must have lit before coming to fetch her. "But why show me now?" Ethan took a deep breath, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Because I wanted you to understand that I have something to offer," he said finally, his blue eyes serious. "I'm not a wealthy man, Penelope, but I've saved my wages, built this place, and Mr. Kincaid's promised me a share in the ranch when he retires. In a few years, I could provide a good life for a family." Penelope's heart began to race as she realized where this conversation was heading. "Ethan, please, let me finish," he said quickly. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I'm not asking for promises yet. But I care for you, Penelope, more than I've ever cared for anyone, and I hope you might feel something for me too." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. Here was everything she had once dreamed of: a good man, a home of his own, the promise of a future built on honest work rather than deception. But he didn't know the truth about her past, about the stain on her family name that had followed her even to this remote corner of the territory. And Penelope couldn't bear the thought of seeing respect and affection in his eyes turn to disappointment or worse, pity. "I do care for you," she admitted, the words difficult to speak past the tightness in her throat. "But there are things about me, about my past, that you don't know." Ethan moved closer, gently taking her hands in his. "Then tell me," he said simply. "Whatever it is, it won't change how I feel." Penelope wished she could believe him, but experience had taught her that promises were easily made and just as easily broken. Still, she owed him the truth, even if it meant the end of whatever might have been between them. "My father was a banker in Boston," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "Respected, or so we thought. After my mother died, he changed, started gambling, drinking. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten until after his death, when the creditors came calling." She swallowed hard. "But it wasn't just debts. There were accusations that he had embezzled from the bank, used clients' money to cover his losses." She couldn't look at Ethan as she continued. "Nothing could be proven since he was dead, but the scandal was enough. Our home, our possessions, everything was sold to repay what could be repaid. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. The only position I could find was as a scullery maid, and even that was withdrawn when they learned my name." "So you came west," Ethan said softly, his hands still holding hers. Penelope nodded. "Mrs. Jenkins didn't know the details, only that I needed work and was willing to travel. I've been afraid to tell anyone the truth, afraid it would follow me here too." She finally looked up, expecting to see revulsion or at least disappointment in his face. Instead, she found only compassion and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "Your father's actions aren't yours, Penelope," Ethan said firmly. "You were a victim of his choices, not a party to them. But my name is yours, not his," he interrupted gently. "And it's who you are that matters to me, not who your father was or what he did." The tears Penelope had been holding back spilled over. "How can you say that? You don't know what it's like to have people look at you and see only a name associated with dishonesty and disgrace." "Maybe I don't," he conceded. "But I know what it's like to be judged for circumstances beyond my control. When I first came west, I was just a skinny kid from Ohio with no skills except a willingness to work hard. Plenty of people thought I wouldn't last a month." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "They were wrong about me. And anyone who would judge you for your father's actions is wrong about you." Penelope wanted desperately to believe him, to accept the understanding he offered so freely. But years of guarding herself against disappointment made trust difficult. "I should get back," she said, withdrawing her hands. "The others will wonder where we've gone." Ethan didn't try to stop her, but as she moved toward the door, he spoke again. "Penelope." She turned to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it almost broke her heart. "I meant what I said. My feelings haven't changed. When you're ready to believe in yourself the way I believe in you, I'll be here." The ride back to the celebration was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Ethan didn't press her for a response to his declaration, and Penelope was grateful for the space to sort through her tumultuous emotions. By the time they returned to the barn, the festivities were in full swing. The musicians played lively tunes while couples danced in the cleared center of the floor. Children squealed with delight as they opened simple gifts: wooden toys, peppermint sticks, new mittens. "There you are," Mr. Kincaid boomed as they entered. "Thought you two had run off somewhere." He winked at Ethan, who managed a smile despite the tension of the past hour. "Just showing Miss Foster the property," Ethan replied smoothly. "Thought she might like to see a bit of the Diamond K beyond the barn." "Well, you're just in time for the gift-giving," Kincaid said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "And I believe Maria's been looking for Miss Foster something about helping with the punch." As Penelope moved toward the refreshment table where the ranch cook's wife was ladling spiced cider into cups, she found herself watching Ethan interact with the other ranch hands. The easy camaraderie, the respect they showed him, the way even the children gravitated to him all spoke to the character of the man she'd come to care for far more deeply than she had intended. "He's a good one, that Ethan," Maria said, following Penelope's gaze. "Been here longer than most, Mr. Kincaid treats him like the son he never had." "I can see why," Penelope murmured, accepting a cup to pass to one of the waiting guests. Maria agreed, a knowing gleam in her dark eyes. "Been wondering when he'd finally bring a girl to one of these gatherings." 5 years I've known him, and you're the first." She patted Penelope's arm. "Must be special, that's all I'm saying." The celebration continued late into the evening, with Penelope gradually relaxing back into the warmth of the gathering. She danced with Ethan and several of the other ranch hands, laughed at stories of cattle drives and wild horses, and for a few hours allowed herself to imagine belonging to this makeshift family. When it was finally time to return to town, Ethan wrapped her in a thick blanket against the night chill before helping her into the wagon. "Thank you for coming today," he said as they traveled under a canopy of winter stars. "Meant a lot to have you there." "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, gathering her courage, "and for understanding about my father, about everything." Ethan glanced at her, his profile illuminated by moonlight. "Nothing to understand. We've all got pasts, Penelope. It's what we do with our futures that counts." The simple wisdom of his words stayed with Penelope long after he had delivered her safely to the boarding house door with a chaste kiss to her hand, and a promise to call again after Christmas. That night, lying in her narrow attic bed, Penelope allowed herself to truly consider, for the first time in years, the possibility of a future not defined by her father's shame. A future where she might be judged for her own actions rather than his. A future, perhaps, with a man who saw her worth when she herself had forgotten it existed. As winter deepened, so did Penelope's relationship with Ethan. Their Sunday visits continued, sometimes at the boarding house and sometimes, when weather permitted, with rides to the Diamond K or picnics in sheltered spots where the winter sun provided enough warmth to be comfortable. Mrs. Jenkins, while maintaining her role as chaperone, had softened considerably in her attitude toward their courtship. "Never thought I'd see that boy settle down," she remarked one evening after Ethan had departed. "But he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Penelope, who had been clearing the tea things, paused at the unexpected comment. "He's a good man," she said carefully. "Better than good," Mrs. Jenkins corrected. "And he seems to make you happy. You smile more these days." It was true. Despite her lingering fears about her past, Penelope found joy in Ethan's company and in the small community that had gradually accepted her as one of their own. The hard work at the boarding house remained, but it no longer seemed like penance for sins not her own. February brought a harsh winter storm that kept Ethan from his usual visit. Penelope tried not to worry as the snow piled higher outside the boarding house windows, making travel from the ranch impossible. "They know what they're doing out there, Mrs. Jenkins assured her as they prepared dinner for the snowbound boarders. Ethan's been through worse winters than this. Still, Penelope couldn't help the flutter of relief that went through her when, 3 days after the storm passed, a now familiar figure on horseback appeared in the street below. She hurried to the front door, propriety momentarily forgotten in her eagerness to see him. Ethan's face lit up at the sight of her, but as he dismounted, Penelope noticed he moved stiffly, favoring his left side. "What happened?" she asked, concern immediately replacing relief. "Nothing serious," he assured her, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. "Had a disagreement with a young stallion during the storm. He won." Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway behind Penelope. "Goodness, boy, you look half frozen. Come in before you catch your death." Inside, seated by the parlor fire with a cup of hot coffee, Ethan reluctantly provided more details. "One of the yearlings got spooked during the worst of the blizzard, broke through the corral fence. Would have frozen for sure if we didn't find him. So you went out in that." Penelope couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Ethan shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Couldn't let him die. Managed to track him about a mile from the ranch, but when I got him cornered, he panicked, caught me with a kick before I could calm him down. Are you injured?" Penelope asked, scanning him for signs of serious harm. "Just bruised ribs," he said, though his careful movements suggested just was an understatement. "Doc Stevens checked me over yesterday, said nothing's broken." Mrs. Jenkins snorted. "Bruised ribs are bad enough. You need rest, not a 5-mile ride into town." "Probably," Ethan agreed with a wry smile, but I needed to see Penelope more. The simple statement, spoken with such conviction, sent warmth spreading through Penelope's chest. Even Mrs. Jenkins seemed affected, her stern expression softening slightly. "Well, since you're here, you might as well stay for dinner," the older woman declared. "And I expect you to take it easy. Penelope, make sure he stays put while I finish in the kitchen." Left alone, Penelope moved to sit beside Ethan on the sofa. "You shouldn't have risked the ride," she said softly, though she couldn't deny her happiness at seeing him. "Couldn't bear the thought of you worrying," he replied, capturing her hand in his. "Besides, I missed you." The admission, so simply stated, nearly undid her. In all her years in Boston, no one had ever made her feel so genuinely valued, so necessary to their happiness. "I missed you too," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "When the storm hit, I kept thinking about you out there," and she broke off, the fear she'd felt still too raw. Ethan's expression grew serious. "I'm tougher than I look," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "Takes more than a blizzard to keep me from where I want to be. And where is that?" Penelope asked, somehow knowing his answer would change everything between them. "Wherever you are," he said simply. The weeks that followed brought a gradual thaw, both in the weather and in Penelope's lingering reservations. Ethan's ribs healed, and with the coming of spring, his visits often included horseback rides through the greening countryside around Silver Creek. On a particularly fine Sunday in April, he arrived with an extra horse, a gentle bay mare that Penelope had admired on previous visits to the Diamond K. "Thought you might like to ride her yourself today," he explained as she hesitantly approached the animal. "She's sweet-tempered, good for beginners." "I haven't ridden since I was a girl," Penelope admitted, stroking the mare's velvety nose, "and never like this." In Boston, she had occasionally ridden side-saddle in the park, always properly chaperoned and on well-behaved horses. Ethan grinned. "Then it's time you learned. Can't live out west without knowing how to ride proper, Mrs. Jenkins, who had come outside to see them off, shook her head but made no objection. "Be back before dark. was all she said as Ethan helped Penelope mount and adjusted the stirrups for her. The mare, true to Ethan's word, was patient as Penelope reacquainted herself with the feeling of being on horseback. By the time they had ridden beyond the town limits, she felt confident enough to urge the horse into a gentle trot alongside Ethan's larger mount. "Where are we going?" she asked as they followed a narrow trail that wound through budding cottonwoods along a small creek. "Thought I'd show you my favorite spot," Ethan replied, his expression unreadable. "Not far now." The trail eventually opened into a small meadow nestled against a rocky hillside. Protected from the worst of the wind by the surrounding terrain, the meadow was already carpeted with early spring wildflowers, blue, yellow, and purple blooms nodding in the gentle breeze. "Oh," Penelope breathed, taking in the unexpected beauty. "It's lovely." "Comes alive this time of year," Ethan agreed, dismounting and moving to help her down. "Found it my first spring at the Diamond K, been coming back ever since when I need a quiet place to think." He spread a blanket in a sunny spot and produced a simple picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a small jug of lemonade. As they ate, Penelope found herself more relaxed than she could remember being in years, content in the peaceful setting and Ethan's company. "Penny for your thoughts," he said after they had finished eating, both leaning back to watch clouds drift across the blue sky. "I was just thinking how different my life is now from what I imagined it would be," she replied honestly. "A year ago, I never would have pictured myself here like this." "Regrets?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Penelope turned to look at him, struck again by how handsome he was with the spring sunlight gilding his features. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "No regrets." Something shifted in his expression, then a decision made, a course set. "Penelope," he began, sitting up and taking her hand. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart began to race, sensing the importance of the moment. "Yes, these past months getting to know you, they've been the happiest of my life." His blue eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "I know you came west thinking you were leaving everything behind, starting over with nothing. But I see now that you brought the most important things with you: your courage, your kindness, your strength." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the sunlight. "This was my mother's," he said, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small pearl. "She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for when I found someone worth spending my life with." Penelope's breath caught as Ethan slid from the blanket to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "I love you, Penelope Foster," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I love your smile, your spirit, the way you see good in a world that hasn't always been kind to you. I want to build a life with you right here if you'll have me." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stop as Penelope looked at the man kneeling before her, this good, honest man who had shown her that her worth wasn't determined by her father's mistakes or society's judgments. For so long she had believed she deserved nothing, that happiness wasn't meant for girls like her, but here was Ethan, offering her everything she'd stopped believing was possible: love, a home, a future. "Yes," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her hand. "I promise you won't regret it," he said, gathering her into his arms. "I'll spend every day making sure you know how precious you are to me." As his lips met hers in their first true kiss, gentle and reverent and full of promise, Penelope felt the last of her doubts fall away. Here, in this man's arms, she had found not just a home but a truth she had forgotten: that love saw beyond mistakes and circumstances to the heart within. News of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Mrs. Jenkins, though she tried to maintain her stern demeanor, was caught wiping away tears when Penelope showed her the ring. "Knew he was serious about you," she said gruffly. "Still, didn't expect him to move quite so fast." "Is it too fast?" Penelope asked, suddenly anxious. "We've only known each other a few months." Mrs. Jenkins waved away her concern. Out here, folks don't waste time once they know their minds. Life's too uncertain to dally. Her expression softened. Besides, I've never seen two people better suited. He looks at you like you're a miracle, and you bloom under his attention like a flower after rain. The wedding was set for early June, giving them time to prepare while taking advantage of the fine weather. Mr. Kincaid, delighted by the news, offered the main house at the Diamond K for the ceremony and celebration. Been waiting years for that boy to find the right girl, he told Penelope when she and Ethan visited the ranch to discuss arrangements. Should have known it would take someone special like you to catch his eye. Preparations consumed the following weeks. Mrs. Jenkins, revealing an unexpected sentimental streak, insisted on helping Penelope create a proper trousseau. Can't have you starting married life without decent linens and a few pretty things, she declared, producing fabric for new dresses and nightgowns. My wedding gift to you. Penelope, touched by the generosity, found herself embraced by the small community in ways she hadn't expected. The banker's wife organized a gathering where the women of Silver Creek presented her with household items, embroidered pillowcases, a handmade quilt, cooking utensils. We take care of our own, the blacksmith's wife explained when Penelope tried to express her gratitude. And you're one of us now. One of us? The words echoed in Penelope's mind long afterward. In Boston, her identity had been shaped by her family's position, then by their disgrace. Here, she was accepted for herself, her work ethic, her kindness, her love for a man the town respected. Ethan, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to prepare their future home. The cabin, already comfortable, received new curtains at the windows, additional shelves for Penelope's few books, and a rocking chair on the covered porch for summer evenings, he explained. As the wedding day approached, Penelope found herself filled with a quiet joy that deepened with each passing day. The girl who had arrived in Silver Creek less than a year ago, believing herself unworthy of happiness, had found not just love but a place to belong. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that seemed created for beginnings. At the Diamond K, the main house had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons. Ranch hands in their Sunday best mingled with townspeople in the yard, while inside, Penelope prepared with the help of Mrs. Jenkins and Maria. Something borrowed, Mrs. Jenkins said, fastening a delicate lace shawl around Penelope's shoulders. It complemented the simple white dress they had sewn together over the past weeks, modest but elegant, with tiny pearl buttons down the back that had been Maria's contribution. And something blue, Maria added, tucking a forget-me-not into Penelope's upswept dark hair, for happiness and true love. Penelope gazed at her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Not because of the dress or the carefully arranged hair, but because of the quiet confidence in her eyes and the soft smile that seemed permanent these days. A knock at the door revealed Mr. Kincaid, who had asked for the honor of escorting her in the absence of any family. "Ready, Miss Foster?" he asked, his usually booming voice gentled with emotion. "There's a mighty anxious young man waiting out there." "I'm ready," Penelope replied, surprised to find no nervousness, only certainty. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. Under an arch of wildflowers in the Kincaid parlor, Penelope and Ethan exchanged vows before the traveling preacher who visited Silver Creek once a month. The room was crowded with well-wishers, but Penelope saw only Ethan, his blue eyes steady on hers, his smile tender as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Ethan's kiss was gentle but carried a promise that brought heat to Penelope's cheeks and caused a few good-natured whistles from the ranch hands. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was food and music, dancing and laughter. Penelope, moving from guest to guest on her new husband's arm, was struck repeatedly by how many people had come to wish them well, people who had been strangers less than a year ago but were now friends, even family of a sort. Happy, Mrs. Caldwell?" Ethan asked as they took a moment alone on the porch, the sounds of the party continuing behind them. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "It feels like a dream." "If it is, I don't want to wake up," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Still can't believe you're really mine." "Believe it," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "I love you, Ethan Caldwell, more than I ever thought possible." His smile, tender and a little wondering, warmed her to her core. "And I love you, Penelope Caldwell, always will." As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ethan led his bride to the waiting wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ranch hands. Amid cheers and well wishes, they departed for the cabin that would now be their home. The interior was aglow with lamplight, and on the table sat a small vase of wildflowers, Ethan's final touch before leaving that morning. Penelope moved through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes now that this was truly her home, their home. "Welcome home," Ethan said softly from behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "It's not grand, but it's perfect," she interrupted, turning to face him. "Everything I could want." His kiss then was different from those before, deeper, more urgent, filled with a longing they had both kept carefully in check during their courtship. Penelope responded with equal fervor, her earlier shyness forgotten in the certainty that this man, her husband, treasured her beyond measure. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness of their bedroom, Ethan traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice hushed in the intimate space. Penelope considered for a moment, trying to put into words the fullness in her heart. "I was thinking about the day I arrived in Silver Creek," she said finally. "How lost I felt, how certain that nothing good would come of my life again." Ethan pulled her closer, his warmth a comfort against the cool night air. "And now?" "Now I know better," she murmured, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "You showed me that the past doesn't have to define the future, that I'm worthy of love, of happiness." "You always were," he said with quiet conviction. "From the moment I saw you hanging laundry in the boarding house yard, I knew there was something special about you. Took me a while to convince you, that's all." Penelope smiled in the darkness. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," he promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Not then, not now, not ever." As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms in the home they would share, Penelope's last thought was one of wonder that the journey that had begun in loss and shame had led her here, to this man, this life, this happiness she had never believed she deserved. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also joys beyond measure. The little cabin expanded as the Diamond K prospered and Ethan's position grew more secure. When old Mr. Kincaid finally retired to live with his daughter in California, he made good on his promise, leaving Ethan a partnership in the ranch he had served so faithfully. "Always knew you had it in you, boy," Kincaid said the day he signed the papers. "Just needed the right woman to settle you down and give you something to build for." Penelope, standing proudly at her husband's side, squeezed his hand as he accepted the responsibility with characteristic humility. "I won't let you down, sir." "Never thought you would," the old rancher replied with a wink at Penelope. "You've got a good head for business and the best heart I've ever known." Their family grew too. First came Elizabeth, born a year after their wedding, a daughter with her father's wheat gold hair and her mother's thoughtful nature. 2 years later, James arrived, followed by Sarah another 3 years after that. Each child was welcomed with joy into the home that Ethan and Penelope had created, a home filled with laughter, love, and the certainty that they were valued beyond measure. Mrs. Jenkins became a regular visitor, her gruff exterior softening completely when confronted with the children who called her Grandma Jenkins, despite the lack of blood relation. "Never thought I'd live to see the day," she confessed to Penelope as they watched the children play in the yard of what was now a substantial family home. You with 3 beautiful children and the most respected rancher in the territory for a husband. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself, Penelope admitted, her hand absently touching the locket Ethan had given her on their 5th anniversary inside, miniature portraits of their children, her most treasured possession besides her wedding ring. Believe it, Mrs. Jenkins said firmly. You deserve every bit of it and more. 10 years to the day after their wedding, Ethan took Penelope back to the meadow where he had proposed. The wildflowers bloomed just as they had that spring day, and their 3 children ran ahead, eager to explore the special place they'd heard about in family stories. Happy anniversary, Mrs. Caldwell, Ethan said, drawing her close as they watched Elizabeth show her younger siblings a nest of field mice hidden in the tall grass. Happy anniversary, Mr. Caldwell, she replied, leaning into his embrace with the ease of long familiarity. A decade of marriage had only deepened her love for this man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly, his voice serious. Coming west, marrying a simple cowboy, living out here away from the comforts you grew up with. Penelope turned in his arms to face him, struck again by how handsome he remained despite the lines that hard work and responsibility had etched around his eyes. Not for a single moment, she said, meaning it with all her heart. Everything that led me here, even the painful parts, I would live through again knowing it would bring me to you, to our children, to this life we've built. His smile, still capable of making her heart race after all these years, was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. When I found you, I found everything I never knew I was missing, he said softly. You made me whole, Penelope. As their children's laughter rang out across the meadow, and the afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, Penelope thought back to the frightened young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in a dusty frontier town, convinced she deserved nothing good from life. How wrong she had been. How wonderfully, gloriously wrong. You did the same for me, she told her husband, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. You showed me that I was worth every good thing, Ethan Caldwell, and I'll spend the rest of my days thanking you for it. Mama, Papa, come see what we found. Called Elizabeth from across the meadow, her siblings bouncing with excitement beside her. Hand in hand, they walked toward their children, toward the future they continued to build together, a future founded on love, trust, and the unshakable belief that everyone, no matter their past, deserved happiness. And in that moment, with the man she loved beside her and their children's bright faces turned expectantly toward them, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that she had found hers.